Hello, this is the Freethought Forum. Welcome, I'm Joe Barnhart.
I'm Suzanne Molner.
And we want to talk with you and hope you'll call in. And we want to talk about rational and emotional counseling and therapy, psychotherapy, and see what it's about and how it helps people and how people can perform with their therapists and counselors and make it work. And we have a professional here, I'm happy to say, and we'll be able to go into some of the details of counseling and see how it operates. And first of all, I want to introduce our guest. We're very fortunate to have from UT here someone who's a counselor there. Dr. Suzanne Molner has a degree in sociology and then a PhD from the University of Florida in what field?
In psychology.
In psychology,
yes.
Of course.
Yes.
And also, what position at UT, to be specific, you do counseling?
I'm one of the staff psychologists at the UT Counseling Center, and I've been director of training. I was director of training there for about 10 years. I'm also adjunct faculty.
On the faculty, too. Good.
In the Department of Psychology.
Very good. Well, we have a lot of questions and a lot of issues to deal with on this. And we see a lot of this sort of thing on TV, but you never know what really goes on in psychotherapy. And may I ask you, to begin with, what's the difference between counseling and psychotherapy? If you can.
Okay. Well, counseling is a really broad term. Mm-hmm. It's used for everything from the guy who's the head of the dorm where you stay when you're at Boy Scout camp to the guidance counselor when you're in high school to maybe a mental health counselor, maybe a wellness counselor,
marriage counselor, yeah.
There's a whole, it covers such a variety of things. It doesn't say a lot. Psychotherapist is someone who is specifically working to try to help people getting under the surface, try to do what they need to do to make their lives better.
Because it's just human to have problems. I mean,
we seem to have that, yes.
Well, and
we have our biological systems that often cause us problems. We grow up in families, which that is the good news and the bad news for us. And we're equipped with whole emotional systems that sometimes work beautifully and sometimes don't work so well. We have our interpersonal relationships, which sometimes are wonderful and sometimes have us pulling out our hair. So, yeah.
I remember saying to my wife that we disagreed, and she said, yes, haven't you disagreed with yourself? And that was a good point, I think. Because, looking back, I've changed my mind a lot. But sometimes, I guess you can say, you need sometimes, just as you need an electrician sometimes to help you solve a problem, or a plumber, you need a psychotherapist and a counselor to help you over some of your humps in life.
Well, I personally do sometimes. The fact that I am one doesn't mean I never need help when I get stuck. For most people, I think we go along, we're doing okay, we're doing well, we're doing okay, and then we get to some point where we're stuck.
Need outside help.
And for most people, we'll get over that stuck spot a lot faster if they have some outside help.
Simply, that's just normal. You can pardon the pun. I'm a writer, and I get stuck.
Yes.
And I have somebody read it, and they'll say,
and that helps.
Yeah, I might say, I had to tell my typist that it makes no sense. Type in, this makes no sense.
That's really interesting, because in a sense, a psychotherapist is a reader of the person they're treating. And reading back things can make a person look at it and go, oh, that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Or, that makes too much sense. I see where that's coming from. By having it read back.
Well, before I forget it, we need to emphasize that this program is sponsored by the Rationalists of East Tennessee and the Atheist Society of Knoxville. Without them, you and I wouldn't be here on this program, and so we want to say how much we appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And also, I'd like to say to our audience there, feel free to call in and dialogue with us. That's what counseling and therapy is often about sometimes, is dialogue and contributing. And we have some questions now that I want to get at. And one of these questions is, can a rational person use positive reinforcement for his own benefit? Can you tell what positive reinforcement is?
Positive reinforcement is reward. It's a fancy name for reward. And reward has been found very rationally by experiments to be the most powerful way of changing behavior. A lot of people think in terms of punishing the behavior they don't want.
But that's not...
It's not as powerful as rewarding what you do want. So instead of smacking the dog when he pees on the floor, when you catch him using the paper, you go, "Good dog, that's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful." You do the same thing with the kids. You do the same thing with your wife.
And a horse? With a horse whisperer, is that?
A horse, okay.
Is that what that's
I guess. I don't know. I'm not a horse whisperer.
Well, I heard him talking about not punishing a horse. And he was gentle with a horse. And it wasn't like the old cowboy movies where you break them. But he was saying you deal with a horse. Okay, so that's positive reinforcement.
That's positive reinforcement. And that's not only the kindest way to raise a child, it's also the most powerful. To praise them every time you catch them doing something right.
Something good, well, that makes sense. I mean, that's what I like.
And we work for it, We work for rewards.
Yeah,
we all do. Including just getting a smile from you. I work for that.
Okay.
That's a reward.
I got you, yeah. Well, a baby smiles. An infant smiles. And the father and mother smiles back. And it is reinforcing.
It is, isn't it?
When a kid smiles, yeah. Okay. But I've heard of negative reinforcement. That's not punishment, is it?
No, and most people think it is, and so it was probably a terrible choice of words. Negative reinforcement is the withdrawal of reward.
Okay.
It's no reinforcement. So dog pees on floor. You don't hit the dog, but you definitely don't go, "Oh, good doggy."
You just ignore it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Ignoring, that's when parents are told to ignore bad behavior. Your toddler throws himself on the floor of the grocery store, screaming and pounding his heels because he wants some kind of sugar cereal or whatever.
Don't make a big issue, just walk away.
And it's very non-rewarding to a person or whoever to be ignored.
If you're on a tirade, you want an audience, don't you?
Right.
Okay. So in that way, it's a negating. You negate the punishment. And if someone's doing something, and since it's punishing to you, you negate that, but simply ignoring it or not rewarding it. Not rewarding it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's very powerful.
Okay. So if you've got a client who comes in and tries to take over and dominate, and you don't confront the client, you just wait until they're ready to...
Not unless you get really desperate. Once in a while, I've got desperate enough to say, "Wait a minute, you're not letting me get a word in edgewise here." But no, ordinarily, what we do is listen for the important material, what's really the client is dominating for whatever reason, talking. You listen for the emotions that seem to be really important in there and reflect them back. "Boy, you sound really upset about that." Or, "You really wanted me to hear that, aren't you?"
Some people have a hard time really talking about their feelings.
Oh, yes. Yeah. A lot of us are not...
Can you give an example of
Me. I mean, the way I was raised. We didn't talk about feelings in my family. You just didn't do it. Mom bitched about hers all the time. Dad tried to keep Mom from bitching about hers or doing anything about them. And nobody talked about them. And so I grew up pretty ignorant about it, and I think I mostly became a psychologist because I was really curious about it, because I didn't know anything. And so I wanted to study about it. I wanted to learn how to talk with people about those things that people in my family wouldn't talk about.
Oh, okay.
That's not why everybody gets into it.
But sure, yeah. But everybody's got feelings.
Everybody's got feelings. And they can make other people anxious.
Yeah.
Some people are made... that was what was going on with my dad. He was made anxious by feelings.
I guess as a teenager, I'm looking at a teenager, I had all kinds of new feelings. And, man, I didn't know how to handle them. And so I got interested in a lot of other things. and fortunately, I met people who were pretty sensible. Talking with it helps me to see. I had several aunts who were just nice to me. And you could sit down and talk to them. And I then realized, actually, you could talk to a female. and then that gradually I realized, well, that's and so I see your point. So I dated very few females in high school, but I had really good friends.
You learned very early to do that. I was scared to death of guys. I didn't talk to guys in high school. I didn't learn that.
Well, I didn't know how to date, but I could talk.
But you could talk.
And they were just real. It was good for me,
And that's one of the things that happens. Most of the clients I work with are typical university-age people. They aren't all, because the university has. There's one couple I'm seeing her. They're around 50 years old. There's students of all different ages. Mostly, though, they're 19, 20, 23, 25-year-olds. And often they haven't learned that they can talk to anybody about these things. And so one of the things they get out of coming to meet with me or one of the other psychologists is that we help them talk. We accept what they're talking about. They learn they can talk about personal things to somebody, even if it's just one of these professional people, and then they maybe can try with other people.
Well, now that helps me to understand my Aunt Louise. 5 fundamentalist preachers came to speak at her funeral, and they had a great sense of humor, and they had wonderful stories, and I could talk to her, She had such good common sense.
Everybody could talk to her, including the 5 fundamentalist preachers.
Yeah, and they loved her, They all wanted to speak because they were grateful to her. And my uncle, who married her, had fortunately grown up at the time he was 30, thanks to her. But in looking back, I realized she was a kind of community counselor,
Yeah.
People could actually talk, and she was calm and exceedingly pleasant. And you could say just whatever you wanted to.
She wasn't critical.
No.
But she really listened, which is the other part. It isn't just talking, it's having somebody really listen.
Yeah.
Acknowledge what you're saying, interact with it, so they're really there.
And she could be humorous enough to let you know she caught what you were, let's just say, well, that does sound a little screwy, and their humor would let you know that was a little screwy. If we got any callers coming in, we'll be glad to feel them. Okay, let me ask you some more questions. How do our beliefs affect our feelings?
Well, that's a great question. Beliefs are cognitive, They're not. They trigger emotions, but they themselves are constructions that are put on the world, assumptions, conclusions, expectations. They're cognitive pieces, but they are how we.
Okay.
You got a question?
Yeah. Let me interrupt you.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a caller. Go ahead. I thought we had a caller. Do we?
Hello?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Give us a name, would you, or a nickname anyhow?
Joan.
Okay, Joan, go ahead, would you? Please.
I'm interested in your title, Therapy, without Atheism, Therapy Without God. And I wondered sort of what the difference is between therapy with God and without God. I worked one summer in a psychiatric building that was run by Christians, and I know that some of the people there were there because they thought they had committed unforgivable sin or something of that sort. So I know there's some differences like that. But in general, what makes one better than the other?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think intrinsically psychotherapy is neither theistic nor atheistic. There are theistic therapists who still don't bring religion into their therapy work. They're atheistic therapists. Mostly that isn't where the focus is, but sometimes religion or religious beliefs or the things people have been taught about religion may be influencing them in really destructive ways, and in that case one needs to deal with that. For example, if it sounds as though some of the people you were working with maybe had religious-based delusions.
John.
I think so, and I was just a student in college and didn't have much contact with the patients except just for general care, feeding them and things like that. So I'm not too aware of, I really don't know how they were, what their therapy was like.
Yeah. And I imagine that for patients like that, depending on how it was handled, some religious therapists might be helpful in that they would understand the framework from which the person was coming and could be helpful with that. But you also have to be really aware of, and I think sophisticated psychotherapists, whether they're religious or not, are aware of the difference between a kind of positive religious connection and a really negative, destructive one where all sorts of...
Whether you're a Hindu, a Christian, a Jew, an atheist, or a pagan, you're going to have problems.
Yeah.
And then any of those backgrounds can have irrational ways of dealing with your problems. So your job is not to cure people of a religion or cure people of atheism, as I take it.
No, neither one. Neither one, but...
You deal with specific problems.
And if you have someone, for instance, where religion has... a common abuse of religion is for parents to act as though what they say is what God wants. Fundamentalist religion often is kind of used that way, and the child grows up confused. Like, is there a difference between mom's views and God's views? And they may have them completely confused. Well, it's helpful for them as an adult to figure out that those things got messed together, and to know that just because mom says this doesn't mean that God or some other large power says it.
I went to a theology school, and our teachers would always say, don't forget, it's human beings who are interpreting the Bible. And it's not God just speaking in your head.
Which is very different from what fundamentalists are taught, who will tend to be taught that what's written there is God having dictated it. But you're saying in your theology school, they were saying, no, you got to remember this is all people's writing.
People interpreting.
And whether it's the priest or the pastor or whomever,
the guru or whatever,
they're putting it out there. And it's all coming. It's coming from humans.
You got a creed. The creed itself has to be interpreted by human beings.
Yes.
And that's why criticism is good. Now, that's distinguish. I think you do. I'm sure you do. You distinguish between a viewpoint and the person.
I try to.
I mean,
yes.
If I have a real crazy, and I'm 80 years old. I've had a lot of crazy ideas, and you at my age, you will too. fortunately, most of my friends don't criticize me, but my crazy ideas, and that's to my advantage. Because if I continue believing all my crazy ideas...
And that's one of the things that we do a lot of as therapists is listen for. Okay, this is a belief you have or an idea you have that is causing you lots of problems, so let's figure out how I can get you to look at that and question, do I really have to believe that? For example, one of the things one often deals with in a university is overblown perfectionism. Students who believe that they really have to have a 4.0 grade average. They really have to have a perfect body. They really have to keep their room perfectly clean. There's nothing wrong with staying healthy and getting decent grades and keeping your room somewhat clean, but they're so rigid that they're making themselves miserable and they are depressed. And so trying to help them figure out, is that really true? Do you really have to have an A on every test?
There are some religions who recognize this problem.
Okay, could you say more about that?
The Protestantism had, for centuries, in dealing with their background, with Martin Luther and so forth, Martin Luther realized, in the tradition, you've got to build up, as it were, brownie points and all of this in order to impress the deity. And it dawned on him by reading the Apostle Paul, who apparently drew the same problem, then that's a dead end.
How so?
Well, because you never measure up totally.
Okay, yes.
Because that's part of being human. And so the Protestant tradition, and I think it had an impact on Carl Rogers, we can talk about this in a minute. The Protestant tradition said the justification by trust and by faith, but they meant by that trust. In other words, just trust the deity's good nature. And don't try to build up all the brownie points.
This is salvation by grace as opposed to...
Now, if you try, say you're an atheist, it's the same psychology.
Yes.
You try to prove yourself all the time. Well, that drives you neurotic. Would you agree?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I think that's what you were saying.
It just makes you really miserable.
Yeah.
You will probably be depressed. You'll probably be very anxious because you can never get there.
And where's the pleasure in life like that?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess that there are some differences between secular psychologists and some religious psychologists, but I'll just, you can comment on that or not, but I'll hang up now so that someone else can call.
I'm glad you called in, Joan, because that triggers...
Yes, thank you for your call.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, that was really helpful, because sometimes people get caught up in an ideology, and the ideology serves like a god.
True.
And they become devoted to it. They can't criticize it, and that makes their lives miserable.
Yeah, and we've seen that, Marxism or.
Marxism,
that's a religion. It can be treated like a religion, and so you could probably turn almost anything into a religion if you tried hard enough.
The first Marxist I ever met was at MIT, and we talked and I said, he cursed me. He got so mad at what I said. I said, you remind me of a fundamentalist radio preacher in Knoxville, Tennessee. But I saw the similarities right away, He had all the answers, and I didn't even have all the questions.
Yeah.
But he was coming off like a radio preacher and coming, and he didn't have God. He had the Lebensmacht, the life force. But it was the same thing.
If you could believe it and believe you're in line with it, it's probably very reassuring. And that's why if someone is getting something positive out of their religion, I have no interest in undermining that any more than I would if they were getting something really positive out of a relationship.
I gotcha.
But when it's doing bad things for them,
then that's why they come to you.
Then I want to get it out there and take a look at it.
Here's a woman says, I've got this godly husband, but he maltreats me. Mm-hmm. And we talk forgiveness. Yes. Except where is his repentance? You see that?
Yes.
And my wife, the counselor, and she would say, the preacher is not practicing what he preaches. Mm-hmm. He's not really repenting, because repentance means change. I think this is what you're saying, that people have to change some of their behaviors if they're going to be happier.
If you want a different result, you have to change some things, and that's one of the things we deal with a lot is people coming in and you say, well, what are you wanting from therapy? Well, I want to be happier. I want to feel better. And you figure out after working with them a little while, they want to feel better without having to do anything different.
Gotcha. So,
and that's one of your kinds of clients that are hard to work with, because depending on how set they are on this, you should be able to make me feel better, but I don't want to have to think differently than I do, act differently than I do. I don't want to challenge any of my beliefs. I don't want to change anything, but I want to feel better. And that doesn't usually work because...
Okay, I see. When I was repairing my bicycle as a kid, my neighbor said, "You're doing the same old thing over and over." And I wasn't repairing. I was repeating them. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Repeat the same mistake.
Yeah.
And get the same results.
Of neurotic behavior is doing it over and over and expecting a different result. And that is what happens. And I said,
well, this bicycle, and the guy said to me, "It's not the bicycle, Joe, it's you."
Oh, ouch.
But he was right. Bicycle can fix itself. That was a good case of difference between humiliation and humility. And that was putting it in perspective, that it was my job to fix and not the bicycle's job. So I guess you're saying the patient's got to do something.
They're going to have to do something different, and that's, most of us find change hard.
Yeah.
If it's not the kind we're seeking. You tell me I get to go on a different sort of vacation. I'm going to be, oh, goody, great, that's wonderful. But you tell me I need to operate differently with one of my children, say, or I need to be a different sort of therapist, or I need to, whatever it is, do something different. Hey, if you want your house cleaner, you're going to have to spend more time house cleaning. And I don't want to do that. No.
Okay, what do you do about this? This is a specific case. Fortunately, not in this state.
Good.
Is this woman worked and worked and worked, and her husband kept looking for work. Mm-hmm. He was a young man. She discovered that he had lied about his college degree. First thing. Didn't have it. Now, if a guy didn't have a college degree, that's, a lot of people don't have a college degree. They work, make a living, and do quite well in life.
Yes.
But this guy turned out to be mostly looking for a job. They had no children. She was working, and he kept looking and looking and looking. And this was a time when there were jobs available. And she asked my opinion, and I said, fire him. And that made her mad. Since I wasn't a therapist. If I'd been a real therapist, I could have approached this better.
Well, you weren't being a real therapist, perhaps, but you may have been one of those voices that led her to, a little later, go, I've heard that from 3 people now. Maybe I should think about it. Sometimes that is what it takes. But if I were doing that as a psychotherapist, I'd be saying, well, okay, let's look at what's happening here. So how do you feel when he says, no, I'm just looking for work? Or how do you feel when that happens? And how did you feel 6 months ago when it happened again? And how was it 6 months before that when it happened? So this is kind of a pattern. What leads you to think it's going to be any different? And if you assume it's not going to be different, let's talk about what your options are. So try to get her to come up with the options she has.
So you're getting her to say, fire him, rather than you doing it. And that, okay, I see your point. That way it's more meaningful decision if it's her decision.
We all pay better attention to what we say than to what somebody else says.
That's true.
If I can get somebody to say it for herself or himself, they're probably going to hear it better.
Well, we're going to have to interrupt a little bit just to remind our viewers. This is sponsored by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee, and it's called the Freethought Forum, and we have a phone number on the screen if you can see it, and we would encourage you to call in. And also we have a web page and another way to communicate with us, and we'll be real pleased. Also, the Rationalists of East Tennessee meet at the Pellissippi College on Sunday mornings.
And 10 o'clock, is that?
Yeah, I believe it's at 10 or 11. I've forgotten. I think it's at 11. I'd have to look up again. And then in the cafeteria there, and then the Atheist Society of Knoxville meets sometimes in a restaurant in town, and they have some very interesting discussions, and also just have a good time with each other. It's called fellowship.
Called fellowshipping. That sounds like your Southern Baptist roots right there, doesn't it?
We used to have a corny saying when I was in the Baptist college: "No ship like fellowship." But all it meant is let's have fun together. And we did. Some of the best jokes on religion are by among preachers. I remember, I think I mentioned they were singing the hymn, "How Great Thou Art," and one ministerial student punched his friend and said, "They're not singing that to you." Thinking him off his high horse.
That's good.
Okay.
Well, one thing that I think is kind of a take-home, as it were, message or idea is psychotherapy was developed as an attempt to deal rationally with phenomena that were not across time dealt with very rationally. Sigmund Freud, pretty much the creator of it, was a physician, trying to figure out why people had hysterical disorders, why they had irrational fears, and trying to figure out how you could rationally treat it, as opposed to saying that's wrong, it's the voice of the devil, or just that should be illegal, or whatever. Trying to rationally treat it, and some of the things he came up with, we no longer, they don't work, but the point was it's a scientific orientation, so it's self-correcting. The way that science is self-correcting, you think, okay, it looks like this is reality, and you work on it for a while, and you may find out that no, because it doesn't explain this, and we got to go off and reconstruct our view of, in this case, human emotions or thoughts, but it's self-correcting.
Is it fair to say that part of counseling and psychotherapy is to say it's okay to recognize you're trying to solve a problem and you might make a mistake, try to correct it.
Definitely.
And it's okay. You're not stupid, you just are human.
Yes. A lot of that. A lot of that.
I'm not stupid, but I've got a graveyard of mistakes. And that somehow helped my students, I remember, for me to say that.
I imagine one of them, in my own therapy back when I was in my 20s, one of the most powerful things my therapist did was, I was very shy, socially anxious, and I was ashamed of that. And she told me about a time when she, as a young woman, had gone somewhere abroad and didn't leave the hotel for 4 or 5 days just because she was socially anxious about going abroad. And and yet look at now, gosh, I guess this isn't the end of the world. I guess it doesn't mean I'm always going to be stuck here. So that can be very encouraging. You don't want to overdo that and have it be constantly me talking about me, but as a therapist. But once in a while, sharing a bit that's really relevant can be helpful.
It says you're not alone in this. That I'm a human, you're a human.
It doesn't mean that you're crazy. It doesn't mean that you're always going to be doing what you're doing.
My wife sees music in the morning on the ceiling.
Really?
And
I wish I did.
I'm envious. And she wrote, Oliver Sacks, who studies the brain and all this, and he wrote back and says it's a hallucination. It sort of indicated that I wish she had it.
Yeah, well, it is a hallucination, and I wish I had it. And so she actually got a letter back from Oliver Sacks. That is so cool.
So a lot of people hear voices. And I remember, I think it was Marian counseling with a group, and they were hearing voices they were saying, and Marianne, I think it was Marianne, said to one of them in the group, "Okay, here's a voice, jump in a river." the person said, "Well, that's nuts." And Marianne said, "Of course. So when you hear voices, some of them are nuts."
And you are able to discriminate. She was demonstrating to the person they could discriminate.
So that's what being rational is, making discrimination. I'm understanding what you're saying.
Yes.
Now let's talk about pleasure.
Okay. What do you want to say about pleasure that can be said on television?
Okay. Well, you often hear pleasure denounced. And some people get a lot of pleasure in doing it. And why do you think some people, some people have some reasons behind what they're doing, why they denounce pleasure so much? What do you think is behind that? And there's a good reason, I think. What would be your guess?
Well, there's a classic psychological explanation would be that they're kind of attacking what they're uncomfortable with in themselves, that they want to be able to indulge in pleasure they don't think they can, and so they're attacking people who can. The other piece is that there are people, a lot of people just enjoy attacking things anyhow. They feel better about themselves when they can say, "This is bad."
They get pleasure in doing it.
They feel superior, or they feel like they've got that one mastered.
Now, would you agree with them, let's say, that there are some pleasures that are destructive of pleasure?
Kind of short-term Yes. Somebody I was talking with this afternoon who was smoking a lot of marijuana and depressed. Well, marijuana feels good in the moment, but the residual effect is depressant. It's a central nervous system depressant. And so while they're doing something that feels good in the moment, they are creating more depression for themselves. And there's a great example of it, right? And
well, that helps me to understand. I think it's Plato and Socrates. One of them, Plato wrote about Socrates, talking about scratching an itch. It's pleasure. Keep scratching, and pretty soon you got a lot of pain. So, and in some ways, I can understand these people who denounce some pleasures because some of them destroy future pleasures. And that's what we teach children. Don't do this pleasure, because there are other pleasures that are more lasting and have more depth and more intense. And if you've satisfied this one, you're going to pay a big price and you'll lose a lot of pleasure. But it's not that you're against pleasure, it is because you're for pleasure.
Yes, I want to stay healthy and active and look decent, and therefore I better not eat the half-gallon of ice cream all in one day, although I would like to.
Yeah.
I would enjoy it. I would enjoy every bit of it.
I can identify with that.
But it wouldn't, in the long run, it's going to make me unhappy.
Yeah. I have switched to watermelon. That's still
That's something you can eat a lot of without not too much happening.
You get more exercise because you got to get up. But so
Yeah.
pleasure, you could say, see what you think of this, that at rock bottom is, behind all ethics, is the pursuit of pleasure. And ethics is to develop rules and regulations and guidelines, both social and personal, so that you can advance maximum pleasure.
Huh. Well, I don't know, because ethics are things that groups of people construct, and a lot of it is intended to not just regulate my behavior so that I maximize my pleasure, but to regulate other people's behavior so they don't mess with me and, steal my stuff and all that.
But it's messing your pleasure.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
so would
trying to make, and hopefully make everybody somewhat better off by limiting what people do, and yes, if you have it internalized so it comes out of here, and I think I'm going to really feel bad if I steal Joe's pen, then that's a lot better than me thinking Joe's going to hit my knuckles if I steal his pen.
Okay, and I want to ask you a question about guilt, but I think you may be having a caller, but I'll go. If someone comes to you and says, I'd like to be cured of all guilt, so I'll never have any guilt anymore, I'm tired of guilt, what would you do?
Let's talk about what it is you're really wanting to happen here, because what do you mean by guilt? Is guilt people mean different things when they use a word, and is guilt something you're using to mean this kind of endless self-flagellation, and let's stop doing that, let's deal with things a little more rationally, a little more constructively? Or are you saying you want to be without a conscience, in which case first of all, if you have one, I probably can't take it away from you anyhow, but secondly, I'm not interested in doing that. I don't think that's...
So you think a conscience is psychologically healthy to have a conscience?
Well, I think if you have one, it's pretty inevitable. You're going to have one. You can't just take that away.
I gotcha. What if you don't have one? Oh, you're a sociopath.
Yeah, you're a sociopath if you don't have one. And
okay, and I don't want to be around a sociopath.
No, most of us don't.
I've been around some, and the best relationship to a sociopath that I know of is 100 miles.
Well, being on the other side of a set of bars, yeah.
Because they are without a conscience, huh?
Yes, yeah, they genuinely are, and they genuinely are people without a conscience.
I think,
just missing.
You be my therapist. As I said to you, there are times when I want to feel guilty.
You want to feel guilty. Okay, could you tell me more about that?
Yeah.
It's situations where you want to feel guilty.
Yeah. If I say things to my wife or to one of my grandkids or a neighbor or a friend that is not called for, that is harmful and does me no good, then I need some kind of alarm system to tell me this is not what an intelligent human being and a sensitive person ought to be doing, and I need some kind of alarm to say, knock it off.
And go back and apologize. And whether you call that a conscience or sensitivity to the other person or whatever you want to call it, yes, it's a positive attribute. It's part of the reason we can live in groups.
So your job as a therapist is not to do away with that thing?
No, it's really looking for where it, again, gets irrationally punitive, where it sets up the person, for instance, to say, if they have they feel guilty if they ever say no to anybody, for example.
Gotcha. So you're saying a rational conscience is what you're talking about.
Yeah, and kind of fair-mindedness comes in there, I guess, for me. And that is a value judgment. It's a value of mine.
How do you distinguish between selfishness and self-interest?
You know, selfish most often is a word used to disparage somebody else's behavior. To say your self-interested behavior is something I don't like, and I want you to feel bad about it.
Okay. Would you like to relate regularly with someone who had no self-interest?
That's a great question. No. If you don't have any self-interest, you're going to be just squashy. There isn't a person there.
You don't know how to relate.
If I'm not willing to say I like this, I don't like this, I really love it when you do that, I'd rather you didn't do that, then there isn't any me here.
So you're saying that really that's not a person in a full person.
And I think that's what you're saying is you wouldn't want to try to relate to somebody like that because
I wouldn't know how.
There wouldn't be anybody. There's no feedback.
I had a colleague that always agreed with me.
Oh.
And that was frustrating, you know, because I needed to test some of my theories. And I needed to know if there is an inconsistency I hadn't caught, I need somebody to help me on this. And he always agreed with me. And he wasn't, in that sense, a good enough colleague.
He's probably made anxious by the idea of disagreeing. He probably grew up in a family where, this is me being a psychologist, thinking he probably grew up in a family where it wasn't okay to disagree.
What was so sad is his wife left him. And I like both of them. But I've often thought if he had been more, I don't know.
He's one of those people you wondered if she just couldn't relate to him because there wasn't anybody there to relate to.
Yeah, in other areas, you know, he was very intelligent, but it's just, I never figured this out about him. You know, you can live with people. You want to live with people who disagree with you sometimes because you do things that are really, or you think them and you want to test them out first, rehearse them in your head and then verbally, and then before you put your life on it. And if it's stupid, you'd like to. I mean, you don't mind doing that with an electrician before you put your finger in there.
Well, you sound like a pretty secure person, Joe, that you're saying, I want to live with somebody who will say no to me, who will say, that's not the brightest thing I ever heard of. That's a secure person. Many people are not secure enough to want to hear that.
Well, sometimes it'd take a day or two for me to get over my ego. Okay. And then I'd say, you know, I remember Jonas said something once in church, and I gave a big spiel answering it. And 2 days later, I said, Jonas, I think you had a real good point. I said, it takes time to think.
Yeah, that's healthy and secure interpersonal behavior, that you can do that, you can think about it, you can go back to the person and say, gee, I think maybe you were right there. Which is very different from saying, yes, Jonas, you're always right.
Yeah.
Which would not be healthy.
It wouldn't be fair to Jonas.
Well, it wouldn't be very fair to you.
To me either, yeah. I'd be a carpet. I mean, I can't imagine that doing it.
Well, I guess knowing you, I guess I can't imagine it either. But no, there are a lot of us who are very afraid to disagree.
Yeah, you can. Talk about the difference between being disagreeable and disagreeing. I mean, what's the big difference?
Oh, I think that one's probably one you could answer just as well.
I mean, you disagree with someone in
and that's just a behavior. Being disagreeable is being what somebody else sees as obnoxious. You know, that's really subjective. Are you being disagreeable when you argue with Jonas? That's subjective.
Well, some kinds of behavior are so conspicuously obnoxious.
Uh-huh.
If Jonas disagrees with me, that's not obnoxious behavior. But there are some people who really are obnoxious. Would you agree?
Well, yes, and not everybody agrees on what's obnoxious behavior.
I got you.
So I can say something's disagreeable, but maybe you wouldn't think it was.
Okay, so people have to interpret.
We do interpret. Those are judgment calls. Like selfish. Selfish is another one. That's a judgment call. Are you being selfish when you take the last piece of chocolate cake? Or is that okay for you to do?
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
Now, I define selfish, see what you think.
Yeah.
Is to be selfish is not to care about the happiness and pleasure and security of another person. Care only about yourself.
To be really
Others.
selfish. I think that's true. Yeah.
And that's different from self-interest. In fact, my self-interest would, see if you would agree, and in your counseling, that your if you, would you say to a client, your self-interest includes the interest of other people? Is that part of your framework?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Nobody's ever quite posed that before, but I think, yes, I would with, it's certainly with some of their relationships with people, they have a real self-interest in the welfare of another person.
Well, a person you're married to, certainly, and your kids. If you're on a football team, you don't want them to be hurt.
Harry Stack Sullivan, one of the kind of foundation psychology people, said that love is when another person's happiness is important to you as your own. That is a very stringent definition of love. By that definition, we don't love very many people.
That's awfully hard,
My kids, maybe. I don't know if I'd ever say I'd gotten there 100% with anybody else.
I gotcha,
And now the kids are grown and out of the house. I don't think it's even quite as true.
Knowing your kids, how successful you've been as a mother, love is not being a carpet.
Love isn't what?
It's not just being a carpet as a mother.
Yeah.
And I mean, your loving behavior takes a lot of, sometimes to be strict, I would imagine. What do you think?
I'm not very good at being strict. I wasn't very good at being strict with
Now tell me about your mother. No, I'm just kidding.
I could. My younger daughter has said, you probably should have been stricter with me. I think it made her anxious that I didn't. She would push me to make sure that I would actually draw a line with her and stick to it. And, for me, that was just, where is this coming from? I would have been so humiliated if my mother had had to pick me up and take me upstairs and physically put me in my room for a timeout and tie the door closed, which I had to do to keep her in a room, because she was going to make sure that I could actually say something and mean it, because I didn't like doing that. And so I was not very good at being strict. And the older daughter, she'd have just died if anybody had looked at her that way.
You once said to me that parents relate to each child differently, and I hadn't thought that very much about that, but you're right. And would you say that each child relates to the parent and interprets the parent differently?
Yeah, they do. I mean, partly it's...
Same parent.
Partly it's we project different things onto our children based on, who we are. But I don't think anybody believes children come into the world as a blank slate who's had more than one child, because they just don't.
They don't.
They come equipped with temperaments. They come equipped with all sorts of things that you are undoubtedly going to be treating them differently, because you are responding to a different human being, even if she's only 6 months old. She's still a different human being.
Being the oldest sibling, I could see my mother relating to each one differently. And it was warm to me.
It was warm.
Yeah. She's just good at it.
You've had some wonderful relatives. Some wonderful.
My mother was incredibly strict, but just loads of fun. Both. Now, how she could balance that, I don't know. I don't have that art.
That is interesting.
And
yet you felt very, very moved watching how she did it with the kids differently.
I'm very close to my two brothers. My sister's dead now. We were close. But I just remember the way my mom she just took pleasure in her kids, you know. And it was, my aunt said to me once, Joe, you were so happy to have a brother. You took him everywhere you went. And I guess my mother's influence.
She really conveyed that you were valuable, and she conveyed that each of your children was valuable, and it wasn't. And I'm guessing she didn't set up competition.
She did not.
And that's so important.
No competition.
The sense
that I know of.
Only one of us can be really loved by mom or by dad, or
In fact, I got a baseball in the mail from an aunt in Texas once, because I met her, and my sister didn't get a present. and that, my mother said, she was a mountain woman, and she spoke very plainly, I'm a mind to send that baseball back.
She was so angry
but my sister didn't get a present, and at first it irritated me, but then it was understandable. My sister got left out.
Yeah, and that's the difference between treating people differently and being fair. She was really saying that wasn't fair. Giving you something different than your sister might have been a good idea, but that was not fair.
Yeah, that I got it, and she got nothing, and that just did not seem to.
So your mom was a real advocate for you. You see, you had a lot of, from the way you're talking about it, you had a lot of good parenting.
There's a lot of luck in the world, would you say?
Yeah, starting with what we get genetically. That's something that, of course, as psychotherapists, across the last 50 years or so, we've had to learn more about how people don't come into the world as a blank slate, about the influence of biology on temperament, on mental illness, we've had to learn. I have to learn when somebody comes into my office and is talking about, I'm depressed, I have to run through figuring out, well, is it about something that's happened recently? Is it about a long-term history of things happening? Or is it about their biochemistry subjects them to depressive episodes no matter what's happening, and they just land on you? And that's... schizophrenia is inherited. It's triggered by environmental things, but it's surely inherited. It's not the product of bad parenting or whatever, as therapists thought at one point. Bipolar disorder, that's inherited.
Well, now, what about this?
And so that's why, of course, part of the reason medication is so helpful is because they are biological problems, not just emotional and behavioral problems.
So it's a combination, but one element may be heavier than the other. You have to, and your job is to try to sort that out.
Yeah, because to know what will be helpful for this person.